Welcome back to part 2 of the series of Judaism and Vegetarianism, and I'm here again with my cousin Michael Kalati. You'll notice that we're dedicating these shiurim in memory of Levi ben Moshe. That's Michael's late father and my uncle. And we're also dedicating these shiurim in memory of Elisheva Yael Bat Levi, which is Michael's sister, who we very fondly remember her. She was a great person, very, very sadly missed. And the good thing is, Baruch Hashem, her children are exceeding, I think, even her wildest dreams. So she should see a lot of nachat from them, and Bezrat Hashem, she should see a lot of nachat from Lahavdil, her brother Michael, who, as we mentioned last week, put so much effort into coming up with these sources for vegetarianism. And it's actually very, very thought-provoking. I myself am like learning things I never knew. Some of these facts are incredible. Anyway, I'm waffling on. I'm going to pass you over to Michael. Here we go.
Thank you, Rabbi Mashiach. Very kind of you for that introduction. This is the second part, the second mandate in Judaism that I think relates to vegetarianism, is the concept of compassion to animal, tza'ar ba'alei chayim. And I'd like to quote a few sources and quotations, and then I'd like to recognize the biblical relationship between Hashem and some of our figures and characters and patriarchs and matriarchs, and how they attained their position simply by showing compassion to animals. But here are some of the quotations I'd like to present first of all, before mentioning the other things. We learn in Tehillim, chapter 145, verse 9, quote, God's tender mercies are over all his creatures. It's a very substantial saying that has a lot of ramifications. In Mishle, chapter 12, verse 10, it says, the righteous person regards the life of his or her animal. In the Rambam, who is one of my favorite personalities, in his Guide to the Perplexed, says, it is prohibited to kill an animal with its young on the same day, in order that people should be restrained and prevented from killing the two together in such a manner that the young is slain in sight of the mother. For the pain of animals under such circumstances is very great. There is no difference in this case between the pain of people and the pain of other living things, since the love and tenderness of the mother for her young ones is not produced by reasoning, but by feeling, and this faculty exists not only in people, but in most living creatures. I personally thought that was extremely thought-provoking, because when I started studying, I was surprised that Rambam was so forward in his in this statements about the concept of, the emotive side of animals, and what happens when you do separate the mother from her children. Is it they're not robots? They have a neshama, to a certain degree. It's a living soul.
We think of these concepts. We think of them when we talk about a mother and a child. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But when we come to think of any type of emotional attachment between a mother and a child in the animal kingdom, nobody really thinks in the same terms. It takes the Rambam to come along and make a statement like this to say that's erroneous. You can't just think of an animal as a creature that you would treat any different. That's why we have the halachot of tza'ar ba'alei chayim, etc., which hopefully you're gonna Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch mentions
He says, here you are faced with God's teaching, which obliges you not only to refrain from inflicting unnecessary pain on any animal, but to help, and when you can, to lessen the pain whenever you see an animal's suffering, even though no fault of your own. Even according to the Ten Commandments, animals as well as people are to rest on the Sabbath day. I think this is mentioned in Shemot, chapter 20, verses 8 to 10, and Devarim, in Devarim chapter 5, 12 to 14. According to Rashi, this means that animals should be free to roam on the Sabbath day and to graze freely. There are some other statements in Devarim. It mentions that you shall not muzzle the ox when he threshes the corn. This is to allow the ox to feed if it feels hungry, rather than to be working throughout the day, and perhaps under hungry conditions, and be within a few inches of potential foods to sustain it. It shouldn't be muzzled. It should be allowed to, if it wants to eat from the production, it should be allowed to. Also, the concept in Devarim of you shall not plough with an ox and an ass together. This concept is so that creatures of different species should not be forced to be worked together, because the lesser one may fear, the larger animal, and it may get scared, and if it's strapped together, this may be a problem. So it should always be of the same species, the same strength, so there's no imbalance and there's no fear of a dominant one when working in the field. Also, a very beautiful concept in Devarim chapter 11, verse 15. A person should not eat or drink before first providing for his animals. Here we're taught that before we sit down for our dinner, after working in the fields, we should provide for and feed our animals, that they are contented before we go and feed ourselves. This is a very beautiful concept that I thought is very nice. It also says in animals too must be able to rest on the Shabbos. We say Kiddush on Shabbos mornings. It includes this verse from the Ten Commandments, from Shemot chapter 20, verses 8-10. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath unto the Lord thy God. In it you shall not do any manner of work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger that is within your gates.
Yeah, you should know that there's a set of halachot in Shulchan Aruch about what's called Shvitat Behemta, that you have, halachically, you have to let your animal rest on Shabbat.
Yes, that's
yeah.
correct.
So it's not like some conjecture or some chumrah or something like that. This is halachot in Shulchan Aruch. Simple as that.
Exactly. It mentions in Vayikra, chapter 22, verse 27, it is forbidden to sacrifice a newborn ox, sheep or goat until it has at least 7 days of warmth and nourishment from its mother. And this is very important when you consider the concept of veal. I personally don't believe there should be such thing as kosher veal. Veal is where the calf is separated from its mother immediately, or within 1 or 2 days from birth, which is totally against the halacha, and is kept in a extremely stressful bound position for its few weeks that it's alive. It's fed a very, very high protein liquid that is it's penned in a very, very hot sort of atmosphere, so that it has to drink more of this high protein feed that makes it put some kind of fat on it and meat on its body. Yeah. But basically, to have veal is a terrible, terrible thing. We don't think of it when we see a slice of meat on our plate. Yeah. We don't think of the intense suffering that animals go through on the way to to our dinner plate. This is very important that people acknowledge this. There's in Devarim, it mentions chapter 22, 6 to 7, a very important concept about when you are wandering in the forest and you happen upon a bird's nest. It says, we are forbidden to take the mother bird and its young together. The mother bird must be sent away before its young are taken. In other words, if you are to take the eggs from the mother, you must make sure the mother is out of sight of what you're doing, and it can perhaps cope with it. It can understand it. If it sees you taking the young, it must be a terribly traumatic thing. That it's gone through the whole process of producing the eggs. If it's away from the nest, doesn't see it happening, it'll cope with it better. In Shemot, chapter 23, verse 5, there's a concept of how animals should be relieved from suffering. It says, if you see the ass of him that hates you lying under its burden, you shall surely not pass by him. You shall surely unload it with him. This is very interesting, that if you see your enemy and your and the animal is suffering, you're commanded to ignore your broigus with that person and help the animal. Now this is interesting. In involving yourself in that mitzvah, you perhaps will make up with the person that you're helping. So it has the double bonus. This is interesting.
And if you can make a kal chomer there, you can say if you're supposed to do it for your enemy, all the more so you're supposed to do it if he's your friend.
Yes, exactly.
It's telling you the extent of how you have to...
Yeah, and it mentions about with the relationship with your brother in Devarim chapter 22, verse 1. You must be vigilant for the well-being of a lost animal. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep driven away and hide yourself from them. You shall surely bring them back to your brother. This is important. This is as much relationship between us and animals as us and our brother. So we must consider that as well. Those are a few of the quotations that support tza'ar balei chayim, compassion to animals. But there's a couple of three examples I'd like to mention about biblical stories regarding some of our greatest personalities that relate to how they treated animals. Many great Jewish heroes of the Torah were trained for their tasks by being shepherds of flocks. Moses was tested by God through his shepherding. While our teacher Moses was tending the sheep of Jethro in the wilderness, a lamb ran away from him. He ran after her until she reached Hashua. Upon reaching there, she came upon a pool of water where the lamb stopped to drink. When Moshe reached her, he said, I did not know that you were running because you were thirsty. You must be tired. He placed her on his shoulder and began to walk. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you are compassionate in leading flocks belonging to mortals. I swear you will similarly shepherd my flock, Israel. This is in Exodus Rabbah chapter 2, verse Pasuk 2. I find that extremely emotive. Why? Because I noticed that Hashem sees this act of kindness, and not only does he say, one day you will shepherd my flock, Israel, but he says, I swear you will one day, for this, shepherd my flock, Israel. Imagine the kind of emotion that was behind that statement. When you say, I swear I'll do this, it's almost like it's very important to you. And so perhaps, no word in the Torah is wasted and no word is superfluous. So when you see that Hashem says, I swear, it's like you've done a great thing for me and I swear to you I will do this for you. I found that very interesting. And we find that Moshe, the greatest Jewish teacher, leader and prophet, was found worthy not because of his abilities as a speaker, statesman, politician or warrior, but because of his compassion for animals. King David, God also deemed King David worthy of tending the Jewish people because he, like Moses, knew how to look after sheep, bestowing upon each the care it needed. King David used to prevent the larger sheep from going out before the smaller ones. The smaller ones were then able to graze upon the tender grass. Next, he permitted the old sheep to feed from the ordinary grass, and finally the young sheep for the tougher grass. This is in Exodus Rabbah chapter 2, verse 2. Another story, Rebecca was judged suitable to become Isaac's wife because of the kindness she showed to animals. Eliezer, who was Abraham's servant at the time, asked Rebecca for water for himself. She not only gave him water, but also ran to provide water for his camels. Rebecca's concern for camels was evidence of a tender heart and compassion for all God's creatures. It convinced Eliezer that Rebecca would make a suitable wife for Isaac. And also another patriarch, Yaakov, also demonstrated concern for animals. After his reconciliation with his brother Esau, he says to Esau, "Let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before you. But my Lord knows that the children are tender, and that the flocks and the herds giving suck are a care to me. And if my workers overdrive them one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord, I pray you, pass over before his servant, and I will journey on gently, according to the pace of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come unto the Lord, unto Seir." So Yaakov, even after reconciliation with Esau, he kind of risked this his reconciliation by stating, "Look, you go ahead. I'm going to look after the cattle." Maybe Esau would have taken, as some sort of taken it badly, and it would have. But he stuck to his guns. This is what's important, and that's what he says. I'd like to mention now a few realities of modern animal agriculture. We tend to think of animals going to be slaughtered, that they live a very full life, and that they live. We have this idea of sheep frolicking in fields, but it's very much the opposite to that. The carnivory trade is extremely cutthroat, if I may use that term, industry, and all profits, I guess, the main thing, and so the treatment of the animals is secondary to its to basically the profits that are made from it. So unfortunately, it's more like factory farming today, and it's enclosed pens. Animals don't see the light of day. And so some things I'd like to mention regarding different types of animal rearing that perhaps should be known. Basically, while our Jewish tradition stresses compassion for animals and commands that we strive to avoid causing pain, and tza'ar ba'alei chayim, the conditions which animals are raised for food today are quite different from any the Torah would endorse. Firstly, chickens are raised for slaughter in long, windowless, crowded sheds where they never see sunlight, breathe fresh air, or get any exercise, which is a shame. We have some delicacies that I truly believe should not be kosher. I mentioned about veal before, but there's, we have this pâté de foie gras, where ducks and geese are force-fed 6 to 7 pounds of grain 3 times a day with an air-driven feeder tube. I mean, this is a huge amount of grain in a tiny body. I unfortunately, when I was younger, I saw on television the process of factory producing foie gras, and it shocked me till today. I would never touch this thing. I know basically the bird suffers unimaginable pain. After 25 days of being forced fed in agony, the bird is completely stupefied with pain and unable to move, and is killed. And the gigantic liver, which is now almost the size of the goose, is removed, and obviously the animal dies. As I mentioned before, veal, there should be no such thing as kosher veal. This may be controversial, but I think that it's something that people don't realise, the process that leads up to to ending up on a dinner plate. For veal, to obtain the pale, tender flesh that consumers want, veal producers purposely keep the calf anemic by giving like a high-calorie, iron-free diet. They tie the head of the calf to the stall to prevent him from licking the iron fittings on the stall. Because they have such an intense craving for iron, they'll even lick the metal to try and gain some iron. It's a terrible, terrible thing. Today, chickens are extremely crowded. It's very rare that you actually see footage of what goes on in these slaughterhouses. But if you did, you wouldn't. You'd really rethink what was your values. Basically, in a modern hen house, 4 or 5 hens are squeezed into an 18 by 20 inch cage. They have to be debeaked by hot knife machines so that they don't peck each other to death. They get into such a crazed state. Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, a modern Torah scholar and a teacher in Jerusalem, he states, "It seems doubtful from all that has been said whether the Torah would sanction factory farming, which treats animals as machines with apparent insensitivity to their natural needs and instincts. This is a matter for decision by halachic authorities." Maybe it's coming to a stage where in light of what is actually known and what's becoming more obvious to the consumer, perhaps there has to be a rethink of what is in line with Jewish thinking and Jewish values and Jewish ethics. We're supposed to be a light to the nations. We should we should look at what we're doing first. And also Rabbi David Rosen, also another Israeli Orthodox rabbi and former chief rabbi of Ireland, he says even more strongly. He says the current treatment of animals in the livestock trade definitely renders the consumption of meat as halachically unacceptable as the product of illegitimate means. It's a very powerful statement coming from an ex-chief rabbi.